a near-Doomsday incident in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1957. Ground zero impact area today at Mesa del Sol. Photo courtesy of Carl Willis. A scary incident that took place right next to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1957. For many years, this incident was hushed up. Even today, few folks in America know about this frightening, bone-chilling incident. Here's a special report by Les Adler for the Albuquerque Tribune, published on Thursday, January 20th, 1994. Quote, at 11:50 a.m. on May 22nd, 1957, I was a 15-year-old sophomore at Highland High School in Albuquerque when the city and a good portion of this surrounding region were nearly obliterated by the accidental detonation of a 10-megaton hydrogen bomb dropped on the outskirts of Kirtland Air Force Base. First reported to the public in 1986, this early broken arrow, as such accidents were referred to in military jargon, became as much a historical non-event during the intervening Cold War decades as recently exposed atmospheric radioactivity showers and radiation experiments. Like these tests, it too was a product of what Senator John Glenn has called the Cold War frenzy, which gripped our nation. Those of us living in the region had long known and indeed were strangely proud of the fact that Albuquerque was likely to be a major enemy military target due to the region's role in the production, testing, and storage of atomic and hydrogen weaponry. Nearby Sandia Base, nestled in the foothills of the Manzano Mountains, was widely suspected of housing extensive underground storage facilities where much of the nation's nuclear arsenal were guarded. Electrified barbed wire double fences patrolled by guard dogs were clearly visible from the highway as one entered or left Albuquerque through Tijeras Canyon. To the east, 60 miles to the northwest, the heavily guarded atomic city of Los Alamos, creation site of the first atomic bombs and then, as now, a major national arms production laboratory, guaranteed our supremacy as a prime Soviet target. For a town without major league credentials in any other fashion, this fact produced a certain cachet, particularly in an age of bomb shelters, civil defense programs, and above-ground bomb testing in nearby Nevada. Year after year in public schools, we practiced air raid drills, dropping to the floor at the wailing of the alarm, huddling under our desks, eyes closed, heads down, and covered by our arms so as not to be blinded by the flash of the incoming weapons. With the irreverence of teenage black humor, we short-handed our instructions to the essential and much more realistic message: bend down, put your head between your knees, and kiss your ass goodbye. On that particular day in May 1957, unknown to any of us, a huge B-36 bomber with a crew of 13 was preparing to land at Kirtland Air Force Base. On board, as recounted in John May's The Greenpeace Book of the Nuclear Age and later interviews with surviving crewmen, was the Cold War's ultimate product. It was a 42,000-pound 10-megaton hydrogen bomb, the largest weapon ever made in the world up to that time, and the first droppable thermonuclear device traveling incognito under the code name of Mark 17. The giant bomber, a mainstay of America's Strategic Air Command forces, was commanded by veteran pilot Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard Mayer with the mission of ferrying its deadly payload from Biggs Air Force Base in Texas to Albuquerque's Kirtland Field. Standard operating procedure on all such flights called for the manual removal of the locking pin designed to prevent accidental in-flight release of bombs to allow emergency jettisoning of weapons if necessary during takeoffs and landings. The awkward procedure required a crew member, usually the navigator, to climb into the bomb bay and lean over the body of the bomb at the start and end of each flight to set and later remove the large U-2 pin. On May 22nd, First Lieutenant Bob Karp was assigned the onerous task. With the plane descending to 1,700 feet and making its final approach before landing at Kirtland, Karp began moving back toward the bomb. As described years later by another crewman, the difficult job resulted in Karp hanging over the 25-foot-long steel-encased weapon, roughly the size and shape of a large whale, literally by his toes, to retrieve the pin. It was 11:49 a.m. The plane was nearly 4 miles south of the airfield and landing conditions were normal as Karp completed his stretch across the gleaming rounded shape, lying silent and inert in the plane's belly. Packed with the explosive power of more than 10 million tons of TNT, enough to destroy a dozen Hiroshimas or Moscows, this bomb and others like it, always in the air somewhere in the world awaiting coded attack signals, formed the foundation of America's proclaimed military posture of massive retaliation. What happened next is in dispute. Previously published reports describe Karp reaching up to regain his balance and pull himself into the cockpit and being unexpectedly jolted as the huge bomber bounced through a pocket of turbulent air. Trying to avoid a fall, according to this version, he grabbed for the nearest handhold, a lever that immediately gave way under his weight, triggering a rapid succession of events. The giant bomb under his feet instantly sank, pulled free from its mooring, and tore its way downward, directly through the closed bomb bay doors, ripping them away and opening a gaping, terrifying hole in the bottom of the plane, and the bomber itself, suddenly released from the weight of its 21-ton payload, bounded upward, gaining more than 1,500 feet of altitude in seconds before the startled pilot could regain control. In a recent interview, however, Karp, now a businessman in San Francisco, has challenged the turbulence fall scenario. He asserts, as the one eyewitness to the entire event, that a defectively designed manual release mechanism had been accidentally pulled into release mode by a snag in his long cable, causing the bomb to drop the instant he pulled the pin. Now there is agreement on what follows. "Bombs away!" reflexively screamed one nearby crewman, his eyes wide with shock as he peered into the newly opened void where the weapon and the man had been. According to another witness, electronics operator Jack Reason, it was only a few seconds later that Karp, his face whiter than any sheet you ever saw, slowly pulled himself out of the remaining bomb bay, yelling even above the deafening roar of jet engines and rushing air, "I didn't touch anything! I didn't touch anything!" Radio operator George Houston, seated nearby, alertly responded by sending a distress call to Kirtland Tower. To the stunned operator, he reported the ominous news. "We've dropped a hydrogen bomb." The bomb itself plummeted downward with frightening speed, the 1,700-foot drop far too short for its parachutes to slow its descent. Long before the plane could pull away, the weapon smashed into the nearby barren mesa right next to the present-day Mesa del Sol community, where a lone New Mexico cow peacefully munched sagebrush, oblivious to the source and immediacy of its own destruction. There was an earth-shattering explosion as the weapon detonated. The Cold War is now officially over. Both the looming presence of the Soviet Union, which so terrified us in that era, and the imminence of nuclear war have vanished from the horizon. More than 36 years have passed since that day in May 1957, when my classmates and I unknowingly were nearly vaporized by our own forces. For most of the intervening years, the American public knew nothing of what had happened, and officially, of course, the event didn't happen at all. It was only in 1986 when an Albuquerque newspaper published an account based on military documents recovered through the Freedom of Information Act that the rest of us learned of this accident and many other broken arrows, both civilian and military, that occurred both at home and abroad. If exposure of these events is the first step in understanding them, then a subsequent stage should be a frank admission by all of us that we knew and even tacitly approved of the conditions that brought about those near misses and what we might more appropriately call poison arrows, the above-ground nuclear tests, the uranium mines and nuclear plants, whose careless use contaminated our soil, ionized our atmosphere, poisoned our animals, and even irradiated our own bodies. And if we did not know of them like the good Germans who did not know of the concentration camps, then why not? What ferocious system of denial allowed us not to know, allowed us to shield ourselves from what should have been evident? Who is there to blame in a democratic society, finally, but ourselves? Even the military investigators assigned to the case assessed no blame to the Air Force officers involved in the accidental bombing of Albuquerque. According to the investigation, Field Command, a division of the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project, conducted recovery and cleanup operations at the site shortly after the non-event. What they found was a crater 12 feet deep and 25 feet in diameter, blown unfortunately in an uninhabited land owned by the University of New Mexico. Only the bomb's conventional explosives, those necessary but not sufficient to start the nuclear chain reaction, were triggered by the fall, and according to the experts, no radioactivity was detected beyond the lip of the crater. Traces of the luckless cow reportedly were scattered over a much wider area. Reports were filed and the case was closed for nearly 3 decades. The trail was allowed to grow cold, extending 25 feet from nose to tail, standing more than 5 feet in diameter at its core, and with a total weight of 41,400 pounds. This was evidently nature's ultimate experience in size. At what scale does any creature exceed its own ecological niche? If there is a lesson to be learned here and in the discovery of other events that didn't happen simply because we did not know of them until now, it is not whom to blame, but rather the many ways in which blind fear, magnified by secrecy, can turn all of us into our own worst enemies. Now, Adler is a professor of history at the Hutchins School of Liberal Studies at Sonoma State University in California, unquote. Now, here's a video updated on March 19, 2024, reporting from Ground Zero area in Mesa del Sol. You can watch this video in the link provided in the comment section of this video. This is Norio Hayakawa in Albuquerque, New Mexico.